In 1965, when the United States commenced Operation Rolling Thunder, American strategic planners anticipated air superiority will be contested primarily by Soviet-supplied surface-to-air missile systems. Intelligence assessments prioritized the SA-2 guideline as the principal threat to tactical aviation operating over North Vietnam. Political constraints imposed by Washington further shaped operational planning. Restrictive rules of engagement prohibited strikes against SAM sites during construction, limited targeting of airfields near the Chinese border, and prevented interdiction of Soviet supply vessels in Haiphong Harbor. These self-imposed limitations created predictable corridors and attack patterns that North Vietnamese air defense planners would systematically exploit. This assessment of the primary threat would prove fundamentally incorrect. The DShK heavy machine gun, Dideriovishpajina Krupno-Kaliberny, entered Soviet service in 1938. Chambered in 12.7 by 108 millimeters, the system represented the Soviet response to operational requirements identified during the Spanish Civil War, where Republican forces demonstrated the inadequacy of rifle-caliber weapons against low-altitude aircraft and light armor. Original design specifications demanded a weapon capable of engaging targets at altitudes up to 1,500 meters with sustained fire rates exceeding 550 rounds per minute. Designer Georgy Shpagin modernized Vasily Degtyaryov's initial prototype in 1946, creating the DShK variant with simplified barrel changes and improved feed mechanisms. This modification reduced barrel replacement time from 4 minutes to approximately 45 seconds, a critical factor in sustained air defense operations. By 1964, when North Vietnamese planners organized integrated air defense networks, Soviet military advisors had transferred approximately 2,100 DShK and DShKM systems to People's Army of Vietnam forces. The weapon's operational deployment reflected lessons absorbed from the Great Patriotic War, where massed heavy machine gun batteries demonstrated effectiveness against Luftwaffe ground attack aircraft operating below 2,000 meters. This doctrine was nearly identical to the German flak employment principles that had proven effective against Soviet aviation 2 decades earlier. Contemporary military documentaries and historical treatments of the Vietnam War disproportionately emphasize surface-to-air missile systems. The narrative constructed in films such as Flight of the Intruder and journalistic accounts from the period focuses almost exclusively on SA-2 batteries and their radar-guided interception capabilities. This emphasis creates a distorted understanding of actual air defense effectiveness. American post-war assessments, including the classified Project Checo reports declassified in 1985, reveal a different operational reality. Between 1965 and 1972, North Vietnamese forces documented 1,046 confirmed American aircraft losses to ground fire. Of these, SA-2 missiles accounted for approximately 110 confirmed kills, roughly 10.5% of total losses. Heavy machine gun fire, predominantly from DShK systems, accounted for an estimated 580 to 620 confirmed kills, approximately 55 to 59% of documented losses. The remaining casualties resulted from various anti-aircraft artillery systems, small arms, and operational accidents. This statistical disparity contradicts the popular perception established during and after the conflict. The disproportionate focus on missiles reflects several factors beyond actual effectiveness. SA-2 engagements produce dramatic visual signatures, missile contrails, radar warning alerts, visible explosions at altitude. These events created powerful stress responses in aircrew and generated detailed intelligence reports. Heavy machine gun fire, by contrast, often manifested as unexplained hydraulic failures or control surface damage during low-altitude runs through dense vegetation, frequently misattributed in after-action reports to the generic category AAA. The DShK operates on a short recoil system with rotary bolt locking. The 12.7 by 108 millimeters cartridge delivers muzzle velocities of 850 meters per second with standard ball ammunition, generating muzzle energy of approximately 17,000 joules. By comparison, the American .50 BMG 12.7 by 99 millimeters generates roughly 18,000 joules, a negligible difference in practical application. The critical advantage of the 12.7 by 108 millimeters Soviet cartridge lies in its case geometry. The longer, slightly tapered case allowed a different pressure curve under sustained fire, reducing barrel wear during extended engagements. American technical assessments captured in Aberdeen Proving Ground reports from 1968 noted that DShK barrels maintained acceptable accuracy through approximately 8,000 rounds, compared to 6,500 rounds for contemporary M2 Browning barrels under comparable firing schedules. Standard Vietnamese deployment configured DShK systems in triangular positions with 3 weapons, establishing interlocking fire zones. Each position included approximately 1,200 rounds of ready ammunition distributed across armor-piercing incendiary, tracer, and high-explosive incendiary variants. The B-32 armor-piercing incendiary round, standard Vietnamese loadout, could penetrate 20 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor at 500 meters. Against typical American tactical aircraft operating at altitudes between 800 to 2,500 meters during strike missions, this penetration capability proved sufficient to compromise hydraulic systems, fuel cells, and control surfaces. The A-4 Skyhawk, for example, featured aluminum skin varying from 2 to 4 millimeters thickness across critical areas, offering negligible protection against 12.7 millimeters projectiles. Rate of fire presented another crucial factor. The DShK's belt-fed system sustained 600 rounds per minute cyclic rate, though practical rates during air defense operations averaged 450 to 500 rounds per minute to prevent barrel overheating. A 3-gun position could therefore deliver approximately 1,350 to 1,500 rounds per minute into a defined engagement zone. At this point, effectiveness became statistical rather than marksmanship-based. Vietnamese crews trained to fire in vertical cones rather than tracking individual aircraft. This tactic, derived from Soviet doctrine, created walls of fire that forced attacking aircraft into predictable evasive maneuvers or directly through high-density projectile fields. The optical sighting system, while primitive by contemporary standards, proved adequate for the engagement parameters. The standard DShK sight provided mechanical lead computation for targets traversing at speeds up to 500 kilometers per hour at ranges between 400 and 1,500 meters, precisely the envelope occupied by American strike aircraft during attack runs. Logistical considerations favored the DShK system overwhelmingly. Each complete weapon weighed 157 kilograms with wheeled mounting, transportable by 6-person crews through jungle terrain inaccessible to heavier anti-aircraft systems. Ammunition resupply posed minimal challenges. Standard wooden crates containing 200 rounds weighed approximately 64 kilograms and could be manhandled along the Ho Chi Minh Trail supply network. By contrast, SA-2 missile systems required prepared sites with radar installations, dedicated power generation, and sophisticated maintenance infrastructure. V-75 missiles weighed 2,300 kilograms each and required specialized transport vehicles. The operational readiness rate for SA-2 batteries averaged 62% throughout the conflict, limited by maintenance requirements and component availability. DShK operational readiness consistently exceeded 90%. The effectiveness of the DShK was not universal. It did not threaten all aircraft equally. Its lethality derived from the intersection of weapon capability and American tactical flight profiles. Several aircraft types were particularly vulnerable. The Republic F-105 Thunderchief accounted for over half of U.S. Air Force combat losses during the early years of the air campaign. Designed as a high-speed nuclear strike aircraft, The F-105 was repurposed for conventional bombing missions it was not originally optimized to perform. The aircraft's large wing area and high gross weight imposed critical limitations during low-altitude attack profiles. Fully loaded, the F-105 routinely exceeded 23,000 kilograms. During dive bombing runs, pilots were required to execute aggressive pull-out maneuvers at low altitude. This pull-out phase placed the aircraft within the optimal engagement envelope of DShK batteries. The aircraft's relatively thin aluminum skin and exposed hydraulic lines along the wing roots proved highly vulnerable to 12.7 millimeters armor-piercing incendiary fire. Damage to hydraulic systems during pull-out frequently resulted in loss of control rather than immediate structural failure. The Douglas A-4 Skyhawk operated almost exclusively within the DShK's ideal engagement parameters. Designed as a lightweight attack aircraft, the Skyhawk relied on low-altitude penetration and repeated attack runs to deliver ordnance accurately. Typical A-4 attack profiles involved ingress at altitudes below 1,000 meters, followed by multiple passes over the target area. This pattern dramatically increased cumulative exposure time to ground fire. The Skyhawk's compact airframe offered limited redundancy. Hydraulic systems, fuel lines, and control cables were tightly packed within the fuselage. Penetration by a single 12.7 millimeters projectile frequently caused cascading system failures. Combat damage assessments show that even non-catastrophic hits often forced pilots to eject due to loss of flight control or fire. The UH-1 Iroquois helicopter represented one of the most vulnerable platforms in the Vietnam theater. Designed for utility transport rather than survivability, the Huey routinely operated at airspeeds below 200 kilometers per hour in altitudes well within heavy machine gun range. Insertion and extraction phases required stable flight paths with predictable approach vectors. These phases occurred at low altitude and low airspeed, conditions that maximized hit probability for DShK crews. The helicopter's unarmored cabin, exposed transmission components, and fuel system vulnerability made it extremely susceptible to 12.7 millimeters fire. Hits to rotor hubs, drive shafts, or fuel cells frequently resulted in catastrophic loss. Unlike fast jets, helicopters could not rely on speed to exit engagement zones quickly. Additional vulnerable aircraft included the F-4 Phantom II during low-altitude, close air support missions with its large airframe profile and reliance on speed rather than armor, making it vulnerable during attack dives. The OV-10 Bronco, designed for observation and counterinsurgency missions where slow speed and persistent presence over target areas increased exposure. And the A-1 Skyraider piston engine attack aircraft with long loiter times and repeated passes that made it highly vulnerable. Despite rugged construction, the loss of these aircraft did not result from pilot error or technical inferiority. It resulted from systemic exposure to a threat that matched their operational profiles. The DShK did not need radar guidance or advanced fire control. It needed aircraft to enter predictable, low-altitude envelopes repeatedly. This is why heavy machine gun fire, rather than missile systems, accounted for the majority of aircraft losses during the conflict. The disproportionate emphasis on missile systems in historical memory reflects several converging factors. American media coverage during the conflict focused on technologically sophisticated threats. SA-2 systems represented modernity and Soviet technological competition in ways that heavy machine guns did not. The narrative of high-technology warfare proved more compelling than acknowledgement that weapons designed in 1938 were defeating advanced jet aircraft. Additionally, aircraft losses to missiles generated more extensive intelligence collection efforts. Cognitive factors also played a role. Under combat stress, pilots experiencing tunnel vision and sensory overload frequently misattributed the source of damage. A hydraulic failure during a high-speed pullout might be reported as SAM damage when it actually resulted from machine gun fire sustained during the attack run. The institutional tendency was to attribute losses to AAA anti-aircraft artillery, as a generic category, obscuring the specific dominance of heavy machine gun systems. The tactical effectiveness of DShK systems derived from their optimal positioning within the engagement envelope of American strike doctrine. U.S. Air Force and Navy tactical aviation typically approach targets at altitudes between 1,200 and 3,000 meters, then descended to attack altitudes of 800 to 1,500 meters to improve bombing accuracy and reduce exposure to SA-2 engagement zones. This operational pattern placed aircraft directly in the ideal engagement range of DShK systems, while simultaneously limiting the effectiveness of higher-altitude surface-to-air missiles. Soviet advisors recognized this vulnerability and concentrated DShK deployment along known approach corridors and immediate target areas. By 1967, North Vietnamese forces had established over 7,000 individual DShK positions concentrated in zones surrounding Hanoi, Haiphong, and along transportation networks. The density of these positions created a statistical inevitability. The DShK heavy machine gun represented the most effective air defense weapon deployed by North Vietnamese forces during the Vietnam War. This effectiveness derived not from technological sophistication, but from optimal alignment between weapon capabilities, deployment doctrine, and the operational patterns of opposing air forces. The historical record, stripped of cinematic mythology and technological bias, reveals a prosaic truth. In the skies over Vietnam, a weapon designed in the 1930s proved more lethal than guided missiles, and mass firepower delivered by simple mechanical systems defeated sophisticated jet aircraft. This remains the documented reality of air defense operations during the Vietnam conflict.